Good morning. My name is Jessica McDonald. I'm a manager with the EEI International Programs Department, and I'll also be the moderator for today's session. Thank you for attending today's webinar that is titled ESG Sustainability Reporting Driven by Investors, the EEI Template. On this webinar, we have a great lineup of speakers from both EEI and two EEI member companies, Eversource, which is headquartered in the U.S., and Emera, headquartered in Canada. In recent years, the assessment of ESG factors has grown in significance for investors. In August, EEI released an ESG sustainability template for industry reporting that was developed over the past 2 years in consultation with many stakeholders. Before we move into the presentations for today that's all about EEI's ESG template, I want to cover some housekeeping items. Okay, so for housekeeping items, I first wanted to cover that questions can be submitted using the chat feature, and the chat feature is located on the right-hand side of your screen. You'll very shortly see a message from me saying that that is where you can submit questions throughout the webinar. Secondly, it's important to note that this webinar is being recorded, and a copy of the recording will be sent to EEI members and attendees within about 1 week of the presentation today. And lastly, if you're interested in learning more about the EEI International Programs, you can subscribe to our newsletter by emailing us at the email right there up on the screen at international@eei.org. We have a great lineup, and I'm going to switch the presentation now to the EEI presentation. And give just a brief overview of the agenda. Sorry about that, about the agenda. And so you'll see here I just gave a brief introduction, and then I'm going to pass it to Devin James, who's the Senior Relations Specialist here at EEI, who's going to talk about some background on ESG and then also give an overview of the ESG Sustainability Template. Then I'm going to pass it to Eric Holdsworth, who's the Senior Director for Climate Programs, and he's going to talk about the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosure and Scenario Analyses. After Eric, we have Jeff Kotkin from Eversource, and he's going to give his perspective on the EEI template. After Jeff, we have Bob Hanf, who is at Emera, who's going to give the Canadian perspective for the EEI template, and I'll introduce them formally when their presentations occur later on. And last but not least, we have Michael Buckley, who's a manager for financial analysis at EEI, who's going to wrap up today's webinar. And if we have time, which we should at the end for any Q&A, we will have a short Q&A session. And again, questions can be submitted throughout the presentations using the chat feature, and we'll work our way through the questions at the end. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it off to Devin, who is going to kick off the presentation today.
Thank you, Jess. EEI has been working closely with our members, investors, and stakeholders regarding environmental, social, and governance issues, also known as ESG. ESG issues are generally viewed by the investment community as the central factors in assessing the sustainability and ethical impact of an investment in a company or business. Historically, the investor community relied exclusively on a company's financial performance and regulatory climate when making investment decisions. But increasingly, ESG factors are significant and drivers of investment decisions. ESG issues will vary by sector, and our sector-specific approach differentiates our initiative from other voluntary reporting frameworks. Some examples of ESG topics are as follows. Under the environmental, we often discuss greenhouse gas and energy use, air quality, coal ash, water stewardship, and energy efficiency. Some social issues that are often discussed focus on community impact, economic contributions, health and safety, grid reliability and lobbying. And governance issues impacting our sector are board diversity, board experience, independence, incentives and compensation, and tax strategy. Next slide, please. The investor-owned electric company sector is the most capital-intensive industry with a market capitalization of $1.3 trillion. And we are investing in a cleaner national fuel mix, and EEI member companies raise funds annually to build and maintain the critical energy infrastructure needed to serve customers through the issuance of both debt and equity. And as depicted, regulated electric companies continue to have strong credit ratings with 88% at BBB or higher, and our industry's efforts towards improving diversity is reflected in the fact that 22% of regulated electric companies have a female CEO versus 6% of Fortune 500 companies. There is a fundamental demographic transformation underway involving a shift in asset and investment ownership from baby boomers to millennials and Generation Xers. An estimated $30 trillion of wealth will transfer from baby boomers to Generation X and millennials over the next few decades. This is important because 86% of millennials are interested in socially responsible investments, also known as SRIs, and 90% desire sustainable investing options in their 401k plans. Furthermore, 83% of millennials and 80% of Generation X believe a successful business should be measured in more than just financial performance. But ESG is important to customers as well. Cone Communications, a subsidiary Porter Novelli company, conducted a corporate social responsibility survey in 2017. And their research showed that ESG is very important to customers and that customers are looking to companies to step up and address ESG and sustainability issues impacting society. The results of their customer survey showed that customers are looking to companies to operate in a way that protects and benefits society and the environment, investing in local communities and around the globe, being a good employer, and creating products and services that ensure individual well-being. The survey found that 63% of Americans are hopeful businesses will take the lead to drive social and environmental change moving forward in the absence of government regulation. 78% want companies to address important social justice issues, and 87% will purchase a product because a company advocated for an issue they cared about, and 76% will refuse to purchase a company's products or services upon learning it supported an issue contrary to their beliefs. ESG is a mainstream issue that is important to investors, stakeholders, and customers, and our template provides ESG and sustainability information that is consistent across the electric sector in terms of accessibility, content, timing, and presentation to interested parties. EEI has established an ESG and Sustainability Committee with the goal of fostering continued industry leadership on ESG and sustainability issues by working with investors and other key stakeholders. The committee meets semi-annually in the spring and fall, with additional webinars as needed to keep members abreast of developments and best practices. EEI has been working with investors and related trade groups, such as the American Gas Association, proxy service providers such as ISS and Glass Lewis, interest groups such as SASB and Ceres, and data providers such as Sustainalytics and MSCI, as well as the credit rating agencies, to develop our template and to thoroughly understand what information is important to investors and stakeholders as we will continue our engagement and as our template continues to evolve. Most companies were already publishing sustainability information in their annual sustainability reports, but investors found many of the reports to be too voluminous and expressed a desire for specific information in a concise and specific format. The EEI ESG template was developed with the goal of providing investors with information that is consistent across the utility sector, as I noted earlier, in terms of the accessibility, the content, the timing, and the presentation. And EEI worked directly with the member companies, investors, and key stakeholders to develop the customized template. So over the past 3 years, EEI led the Stakeholder Working Group, and the template contains qualitative information, including ESG and sustainability governance and strategy, and then quantitative information in an Excel-based format, including data on a company's portfolio, both purchased and owned generation, emissions, and human and natural resources. The template helps to provide investors with information on risks from stranded assets, regulatory issues, as well as opportunities for investments in clean energy. We have encouraged participants to keep the qualitative section to a couple of pages since investors stress the importance of brevity. This investor-focused template is used by investors as a primary reporting tool, and it provides consistent and the specific data in the format that is easy for the investors to navigate in its uniform presentation. And that was the feedback that we heard from investors during our entire process. And this framework will help to ensure that investors and stakeholders are receiving accurate information, since many investors often pull from sources such as MSCI and Sustainalytics, This template will help to ensure that they're getting accurate information. As just noted earlier, on August 20th, 2018, EEI launched an industry-wide public release of version 1 of the EEI template, and member companies will report using 2017 data. At the request of investors and stakeholders, EEI developed a white paper discussing the overall ESG and sustainability initiative, and we will post this paper on our EEI website in the beginning of December. EEI member companies' templates can be found on their investor relations or sustainability sections of their website or on the EEI ESG website, where you will find links to participating member company sites. Currently, about 80% of the investor-owned electric industry is publicly participating in using the template, and virtually all companies are engaged in the ESG committee, and we expect 100% participation by next year. EEI and AGA have expanded this initiative to incorporate natural gas metrics into the reporting framework in version 2 of our template. We incorporated these metrics into the Excel-based quantitative section of the template, where we added additional tabs at the operating company level. Please note, though, that the qualitative section is still reporting at the parent company level. And we released a joint press release with AGA during our financial conference, which took place last week in San Francisco, announcing version 2 of the template and AGA's pilot ESG metrics. And we're going to continue to solicit feedback from the investors and stakeholders as we evolve these metrics. The natural gas distribution companies participating in the EEI ESG Sustainability Reporting Template will publish their 2017 data, and we will continue to work with our members in AGA to refine them, and we will integrate them for the official version 2 release in mid-2019 for companies to report using 2018 data. And so one point I would like to make is that our members are voluntarily reporting using this framework outside of the SEC requirements. And this has allowed our members to share their forward-looking strategies in regard to ESG and sustainability. We view ESG and sustainability data as informative and useful, but the majority of it is not inherently material. As such, we believe it should be kept out of the mandatory financial filings, and to the extent that any of the information in this template is considered material by an individual company, such information would already be captured in the appropriate SEC-required disclosures of that company. We know that investors are interested in carbon reduction goals and other forward-looking information, but if these disclosures are included in SEC filings, we're limited in the amount of forward-looking information we can include. The EEI ESG template is a tool that allows our members to present comprehensively their ESG and sustainability-related efforts in the concise manner favored by investors. It is a measurable tool that encompasses specific metrics used for accurately assessing a company's ESG sustainability position. My colleague Eric Holdsworth is going to discuss the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, also referred to as TCFD, and scenario analysis.
Thanks, Devin. Appreciate that. So I'm going to talk to you about the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosure, and really building on what Devin was talking about. At the end of 2015, with the adoption of the Paris Agreement, the Financial Stability Board, an offshoot of the G20 group of nations, which was formed in 2008-2009, became concerned about potential carbon exposure bubbles, and reached out to the head of the Bank of England to put together a task force to come up with reporting guidelines to ensure that companies were addressing their carbon exposure. Next slide, please. And so the TCFD was formed in 2016, and Michael Bloomberg was asked to chair it. Throughout 2016, through a drafting process with public input, the TCFD worked on developing its voluntary climate risk disclosure, the final version of which was released in June of 2017. I would note that much like the EEI template, this is also a living document and will be modified going forward. What the guidelines do is really outline a series of questions that investors and regulators should be asking of companies regarding climate change and a company's carbon exposure and what they're doing to mitigate that. And it calls for companies to provide this kind of disclosure in various public filings. In some cases, financial filings, in some cases, just public documents. The guidelines have 4 thematic areas: governance, strategy, a company's risk management, and then finally the metrics and targets related to emissions and consumption. These are supported by specific recommended disclosure items. Each of these 4 areas, everyone would report under that. And then there's additional guidance for all sectors. And then finally, a third level of reporting in the TCFD is supplemental guidance for specific sectors, including the finance and electric power sector as 2 of the ones that could be the most impacted by carbon exposure. What's interesting to note in listening to Devin's presentation are the parallels between the TCFD guidelines and the EEI template. Now, I will tell you that this wasn't done intentionally because we were both working on parallel tracks, but it turns out that the EEI template encompasses the same 4 thematic areas that the TCFD guidelines call for. I think this helps demonstrate, again, the value of the EEI template as the kind of tool that investors are looking for, and we'll touch on the TCFD's reaction to the template in just a minute. Next slide, please. So the TCFD, in addition, calls for the disclosure of climate-related financial information in annual financial filings. Now, what's interesting, and to Devin's last point on materiality, the information related to governance and risk management, it calls for disclosure in annual financial filings, which generally, I believe, already occurs. Utilities are encouraged to disclose their information related to their risk management strategies and their various metrics and targets in other official reports if the company does not deem that information to be material. And obviously, if a company deemed it to be material, it would be reported to in a governmental fashion. In this country, it would be through the SEC. But the TCFD leaves it up to the company to decide the materiality of the information and therefore where it would be disclosed. And that was another important development with the TCFD guidelines. Next slide, please. The other piece of the TCFD guidelines is that they call for companies to use and undertake scenario analysis, generally tied to the types of carbon emission reductions that would be required for a company in order to help limit temperature increase to 2 degrees centigrade above pre-industrial levels, recognizing that, of course, no single company is able to do that, but rather what policies and risk management strategies is the company employing that would be consistent with the types of reductions that might be called for through various public policies and trying to achieve that overall objective as enshrined in the Paris Agreement on Climate Change. The TCFD, the scenario analysis that they call for and that companies are undertaking helps investors understand most directly the impact of climate change and carbon reduction policies on the potential financial performance and operations of a company. And that's the purpose of running that. It's not designed to be a predictive tool, but rather the type of tool that a company can use to make sure that it is, in fact, managing its carbon risk in a way that is sustainable over the long term. It's also a tool that companies can use to test their strategy and other strategies against different futures. Next slide, please. And so you're seeing this in the public power sector by EEI members announcing their own long-term greenhouse gas emission reduction goals, and many of them undertaking this exact type of scenario analysis that accompanies those goals. Here, this slide shows the 33 EEI member companies to date that have announced such goals, and the vast majority of them have issued this type of scenario analysis to not only explain to investors how they hope to achieve these particular goals and how those are consistent with the sort of long-term reductions called for by science, but also how they've been able to stress test those against other scenarios. And some of the important lessons that our members have learned in doing this over the last year or two is most importantly, perhaps, that this is a marathon, not a sprint. In other words, undertaking these scenario analyses, investors are not expecting companies to develop a perfect scenario analysis and a perfect prediction of the future at any point in time, much less the first time. But rather, this will be a learning by doing exercise. Companies will undertake these scenario analyses and should continually be looking to update them, refurbish them, stress test them in different ways in a kind of continual learning process. So it's a marathon, not a sprint. It will take this will be an evolving process to undertake scenario analyses and make sure that companies are on top of their carbon exposure. And of course, there is no one single pathway to achieve any of these goals. There are an infinite number of pathways. And again, the goal of investors is to make sure that the companies that they're looking at investing in are successfully and properly managing their carbon exposure and their long-term risk management of that. This is also a great way to help keep investors informed, in addition to using, in our case, the EEI voluntary template or tools like that. Between the information in the template and a scenario analysis, generally those are the types of information and pieces of information that investors are looking for. It's also an opportunity companies have found to really look across their operations in doing these scenario analyses and often finding new areas of greenhouse gas emissions reductions or savings that they hadn't previously looked at, or even better new ways of managing or governing within the company and engaging in risk management. So it's an opportunity to look across the company also and learn. And then finally, getting back to a point that Devin raised about materiality that we touched on earlier, this is the type of information that, while it's material in the sense of an investor would want to know what a company is doing over the long term to manage its carbon risk investment, and therefore is germane, one might say, it's not material in the required to be disclosed SEC financial filing sense, where that information has a lot of different legal implications that Devin outlined and would not be appropriate to be reported in that context. So while this is material, it is in a very different way, and therefore important for investors, but outside the normal reporting framework. Next slide, please. And so I think there are really two great examples here of the success of both the scenario analyses that EEI members have undertaken, as well as the use of our template. And we've been able to see that through the use of these tools and increased outreach to investors and shareholders, a number of shareholder proposals and proxy proposals related to the 2-degree scenario analysis or greenhouse gas reduction targets largely were withdrawn last year, because engaging in these exercises and engaging in dialogue, investors and shareholders in many cases understood that the company was in fact already doing the types of activities or reporting that they were looking for. The other proof of the pudding, I think, is that in our outreach, and Devin talked earlier about the outreach to various stakeholders, we've obviously been have reached out to the TCFD, and they have said that the EEI template is a great example of how an industry can translate the guidance in the TCFD recommendations into a practical tool that can then help investors get access to the kind of information in a quick and easy to find format that they need. And so with that, I will turn it over to our next speaker. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Eric. Thanks a lot, Eric. This is Jeff Kotkin from Eversource Energy, and just wanted to. I think we need to launch the slides.
Sure, they should be there.
Okay. All right. So the first slide is basically, let me go. Hold on one second. Okay. I'm going to probably need you to advance the slide because it seems like I go to Bob's when I hit the next one. So why don't we go to my first slide, which says strong commitment to the environment. If you could advance it for me. A little bit of background on Eversource Energy. We're the largest utility in New England. We serve about 4 million electric and gas and now water customers, and I've been involved in the reporting of our ESG metrics for about the last 7 years or so. It's been increasingly important to our company because over the last couple of years we have divested the last of our regulated generation, and so we're now pretty much just an energy and now water delivery company. The only generation that we currently have is about 70 megawatts of hydro, of solar, and we're seeking to build with a partner from Denmark about 2,000 megawatts of offshore wind generation in the region. We can maybe move on to the next slide. So our greenhouse gas emissions, so you can see on our second slide, have fallen steadily over the last 5 years or so. So now remember that the greenhouse gas emissions mostly comes from our generation, and we have sold off that generation. So as we go forward, a large amount of it will come from our gas distribution business. So gas distribution serves more than 500,000 customers. So it was important for us to have EEI and AGA join together in putting together the data and the template. So we were very excited that the AGA metrics are now going to be included in our template and those of other combination electric and gas companies as well. If we move on to the next page, which is the one on energy efficiency, the New England is viewed as one of the leaders in energy efficiency. We spend about $500 million on our energy efficiency programs. And if you compare ours to California, they're probably comparable. Massachusetts, which is one of our two major states, actually has what are viewed as the most advanced energy efficiency programs in the country. And we've won numerous awards for it. About $500 million of our $7.5 billion of revenues go towards our energy efficiency programs. So one of the things that we want to talk to our investors about, and I've overseen investor relations at Eversource for about 25 years, is the fact that we're not a company that depends on sales growth in order to achieve success. In fact, our states actually incent us to reduce the growth in electricity sales and actually have it reversed. So we're probably adding about 1% more customers per year, but our aggregate sales electric sales are going down by about 0.5% to 1% a year. If we move on to the next region, the next page, you can see under leading our region by example, we have deployed solar, and we also are very focused on reducing our own carbon footprint, both through the use of our vehicles as well as reducing the energy usage in our facilities. So supply chain sustainability actually is becoming more and more important, and we now include specific questions related to sustainability in all bidding that we send out. Moving on to the next page, this really focuses on the AGA metrics. They're very focused on methane emissions and pipe replacement, basically reducing the footprint of gas distribution companies. So we've been very encouraging about that. And as we move forward, one of our key strategies on our gas distribution side is to accelerate the replacement of our older cast iron and unprotected steel pipe. That's where most of the emissions come from. It's probably 20% of our pipe, but somewhere around 80% of the emissions. If we move on to the slide that says top quartile performance, one of the things that we discovered, and our group, my group, I only have a group of 3 running investor relations, but we are in charge of the responses to the outside rating firms. So this would include Sustainalytics, MSCI, CDP, formerly Carbon Disclosure Project, Bloomberg. Bloomberg just had a gender equity questionnaire that we filled out. It's important for us to be able to respond to them and also to get the information correct. One of the things that we found before this template process was that a lot of the data, particularly environmental data, was inaccurate, and it was being posted inaccurately. So one of the things that we find is that if we can get the data posted accurately, then we've probably, that's about 90% of our job is done. So by using the template and allowing investors and others to go from company to company to company and find the same material that they're looking for in our template, then it eases the process that they can either enter or download the information, and that was helping to ensure that the information that is out in public is more accurate. The other thing that we find, and this is from several years overseeing this process at Eversource, is that there are folks who are out there scoring our companies and we don't know about them. So if you take a look on this slide, Just Capital actually had a Just Capital index of the large cap companies across multiple sectors in the U.S. And it actually, in 2017, scored us at the top. We didn't even know they existed until a few months ago, even though we were scored at the top. Similarly, we had an experience with another firm that was basically scoring human rights policies, and we found out that we scored fairly low. And then when we looked into it a little bit more, we found that the organization had received information from us in 2002 from an individual who subsequently left the company, and then they kept sending the questionnaire back to this individual for about the last 15 years and never got a response, and kept using the 2002 response and scored us progressively lower each year. So bottom line is, we got to know what we currently don't know, and through this process, by standardizing this across the industry, we're helping our investors and others get the accurate material from which they can make assessments. So if we move on to the next page, this actually helped us in the investor relations area in terms of investor targeting. One of our goals, our goal is basically to be the catalyst for clean energy development in New England. And as such, we think that we're an attractive investment, particularly for socially responsible investing funds. So we now track every quarter how many SRI funds have invested in Eversource. And as you can see from the chart, we're now up to about 120. And we think as we go forward, more and more dollars in Europe and North America in particular will be invested in these type of funds from millennials. As they accumulate more investment dollars, they're going to be looking for basically SRI compatible funds, and we hope they're going to be looking to us. So this is something we track quarterly. We actually have an internal corporate goal to have that number go up each year. Moving on to ESG research. If you take a look at it, ESG research is an evolving landscape. These are some of the firms that we deal with. It may be some of the firms that you all deal with, and it changes. And it changes every year. There's mergers. There's new folks you didn't know about. There's folks that may be dropped off. But the key for us is that we want to make sure that these folks are aware of the fact that our industry, the electric utility industry, was the first one in the U.S. to adopt a common set of metrics. Even though we're a little bit fragmented, we've got 42 members of EEI, so more fragmented than some other industries, yet we were all able to come together to adopt a common set of metrics. And we were able to do that with a continuous input of the financial community, so we know what they want is included in the template. If you move on to the EEI AGA ESG template, you can see that the benefits of this are pretty significant. We were viewed as a cohesive group. We have information in the template that investors want. Honestly, as we went through the process, and I've been to all of the semi-annual meetings that we've had so far, as we went through the process, we found that investors actually pulled back on the number. We originally had a lot more information that we wanted to show to investors, and what we found was that a lot of the investor feedback was, no, you don't want to do too much. You don't want to recreate your proxy. Really narrow it to what we're looking for. So we actually edited it down before we actually started publishing it. And we were a member of the pilot class using 2016 data that we populated a year ago, and the first really full rollout that we populated in September of this year. So my last slide is really the landscape keeps changing. CDP has changed. We've had consolidation among the research firms, and you could see that there's been acquisitions, there's been mergers, and we also just find out about, every year it seems, about new surveys and new data that we didn't know about previously. So this effort actually serves as a forum for EEI members to share data and share information among each other, so at least we know where some of these rating firms are going. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Bob.
Thank you, Jeff. Appreciate that. And here we are. Okay. My name's Bob Hanf. I'm with Emera, and it's a pleasure to be with you today. If I go to slide 2, the point I'm trying to make here is that sustainability for us is core to our strategy, and so much so that the compiling of the report and the publication of the report became a balanced scorecard item for the first time this year. So it was a business goal for the entire organization, and that's how important this is. And if I go to the next slide, it's just a snapshot of who we are. We are headquartered in Halifax, Nova Scotia, which is a little bit north and east of where Jeff is, and we have utilities in New England, primarily Maine, and if I go west, we're in New Mexico and Tampa Electric and Peoples Gas in Florida, and in the Eastern Caribbean, as well as go back up north, Newfoundland, Labrador, and Eastern Canada. That's who we are. And we have, as I said, a strong strategy around renewables and moving from a high carbon world to a low carbon world throughout our business. If I go to the next page, 4, why it matters, and some of these have been covered, but the trends are that the reporting is being, if not legislated, required, certainly I think by customers are interested in this, and just the social trends are the Millennials, as mentioned before, are looking for this, and clearly in Canada, our peers have been participating in this for a long time, and with our merger with TCO has a fine history in this space, and we've been able to grow on that. And also mentioned, these assessments are happening on your companies whether you know it or not, so that's sort of an interesting fact. And as Jeff mentioned, the error rate is too high, so we have an obligation, I think, to make sure that the good story that we have to tell, we need to tell, and make sure the data is correct. Also, I think if I go to slide 5, this number of examples of where there have been advances in sustainability. Task Force on Climate-Related Disclosures, which we've referred to, the UN Sustainable Development Goals 2015, so you can just see that those are increasing, and some very fine leadership on the part of EEI. And like Jeff, I've been to all of these meetings, and it's been extremely helpful as we are at the beginning stage of this journey. Our CEO, Scott Balfour, is on the board of EEI, and I've participated in these semi-annual meetings. The counter organization in Canada is called the Canadian Electricity Association, and they are advancing in this space as well. And our home utility, Nova Scotia Power, our CEO, Karen Hutt, is on that board. So I just wanted to share those observations. If I move to 6, Jeff, you used the marathon sprint analogy. Well, this clearly is a marathon, and you can see where we have evolved from our first report in 2016, building on, I think, a 7 or 8 year history at TCO, and then incorporating the metrics that EEI published helped us tremendously to able to bring materials together such that we issued our second report in October, very much based on the EEI template. And if I go to the next slide, 7, this isn't just a reporting function. It is an operational function, and that's and we need to internalize this such that it's just not 1 or 2 people reporting. And so we've set up a team, a vision statement, and a framework to have a governance process, ensure the credibility of the data that we're reporting on, and as I said at the very beginning, tying it back to the strategy of the organization. So it's very much integral to our business purpose. And if I go to slide 8, you'll see we did have some learnings that'll sound funny, but we actually had paper copies the first time, and we did not do that this year. And so it's online and certainly available to everyone. And I think I'll stop there. But it was very much propelled and defined by the template produced by EEI. So it's been incredibly useful to us. And if I go to page 9, and I think once again tying to our innovation theme, our renewable theme, and you can see the website there if you wanted to look at the report, and I would encourage you to do so. And then finally, as I said, we're being measured by these folks, and some of them didn't have the right context. They had old context, and it's a similar story to Jeff's experience. As a result of our report, last year we were acknowledged by an organization called Corporate Knights, which measures CSR in Canada as one of the top 50 corporate citizens in Canada. And our rankings have improved. And we're doing a good job in all of this area. I don't know that we've done the best job in telling the story, so we're getting better at it. This template helps us do that as a result, and continued hard work, obviously, has resulted in improvements in many of these scores. So it's tremendously positive and useful and successful. With that, I will close. Thank you.
All right, Bob, Jeff, thank you very much for your perspectives. We are now going to move to the last part of the EEI presentation, and I'm going to turn it over to Michael Buckley, who's going to talk a little bit about the Natural Gas Sustainability Initiative at EEI. Michael?
Thanks, Jess. So just want to go through what we're thinking in terms of next steps for our ESG initiative, and I'll try and move quickly so we can save some time for questions and answers. So moving on to the next slide, just want to give a little bit of an overview. So as you probably know, the electric industry and the gas industry are increasingly becoming one interrelated industry in the U.S. EEI and AGA, our membership continues to overlap. So we are teaming up with AGA, and as Devin described earlier, we have now incorporated additional metrics into our template to make it work for gas distribution companies. And so the next step is what we're calling our Natural Gas Sustainability Initiative, or NGSI. So this is our next area of focus. And the reason that we're concerned about this is because our companies are being pressured by investors and other stakeholders as to whether the long-term use of natural gas is sustainable. So we're therefore committed to working with natural gas suppliers and producers to foster sustainability and strong governance practices. So we're working with the upstream and midstream oil and gas companies and trade associations on what we hope will be a framework of existing voluntary programs focused primarily on methane reductions, but also on water use and safety for the entire supply chain. And most importantly, it'll allow our member companies, both EEI and AGA's member companies, to show that the natural gas that our industry is using is being procured from the most sustainable sources. So just moving on to the next slide, just to reiterate, NGSI is envisioned to provide a cohesive framework for sustainability metrics throughout the entire natural gas supply chain. This will include impactful sustainability practices, actions, and disclosures for upstream, midstream, and downstream natural gas operations. So this slide we have here highlights the three main program elements that we envision will be included in NGSI. So that is the measurement, the disclosure, and the recognition of sustainability efforts across the entire value chain for natural gas. Moving on to the next slide, I think this one is very helpful in illustrating how this voluntary program can encompass the entire value chain. So again, I do want to reiterate that we are building upon the best practices of existing and successful sustainability programs, but this is much broader in scope and more ambitious than our ESG template for a couple of reasons. And first, as this slide shows, this effort will be crossing across multiple industries, so it's bringing a lot of different companies and groups together. Additionally, the ESG template is essentially just a kind of a repackaging of information that generally already exists somewhere in an effort to better tell our ESG story to investors. NGSI will be going a step further and will require companies to take impactful actions towards becoming more sustainable, and then it will include a reporting component to report on those actions. So moving on to the next slide, I just want to highlight a couple things here. As Devin had mentioned earlier, the addition of the AGA metrics to the template was announced last week in a joint press release. So right now we're still in the process of engaging stakeholders in upstream and midstream and incorporating their feedback into the development of this framework. So as part of this process, we plan to host a meeting here at EEI in January, and what we're trying to do is bring various stakeholders from across the supply chain together to talk about next steps for this initiative. We're also developing a set of basic guiding principles that can be used for companies to participate. And we're hoping that if we have enough participation and enough support from various companies throughout the supply chain, that we'll be able to kind of announce this and publicly launch next spring. So that's kind of where things are now. And then just moving on to the next slide, this is just for your convenience. If you have any questions or want to reach out to anybody on the EEI ESG sustainability team, these are all of the folks that have been primarily involved here at EEI. So with that, I think we wanted to save a little bit of time for question and answers, so I'll pass it back to Jess.
All right. Thanks, Michael. So now we have some time here for some Q&A, and it seems like we have some questions coming in. The first one is for the EEI team, and we have a company asking about sort of the timeline for reporting, and if there is a member company that's interested in participating in this sort of process, would you shed some light on the timeline?
Yeah, so that's a good question, and the first thing I'll say is it's never too late to jump in and start participating. As you know, as we just outlined, we went through kind of a development stage that transitioned into a pilot stage, and now we're in what we're calling version 1 stage. And so the idea is that we'll be releasing kind of the official version 2 next summer so that companies can use it to report 2018 information in the third quarter of next year. So ideally, we'll continue to move forward each year and make additional updates as necessary and release new versions. I mean, obviously focusing on the next year. So the short answer is you can absolutely start participating now. We have some companies that have not published their version 1 template yet, but still plan to do so at some point this year. So I would encourage you to participate.
Okay, great. Thanks, Michael. And then we have another question, and this one can sort of be open to everyone. So Jeff, Bob, Devin, it's about the investor feedback. And I think, Jeff, you mentioned, and Bob as well, that some of the investor feedback was, we want the template to be straightforward and simplified. So I was hoping we have a question here about, more about that investor feedback. So as you were going through the pilot phase and now the rollout of the version 1 template, what has been some additional feedback from investors on the template? So
this is Jeff.
Oh, Jeff, go ahead.
Yeah, let me just jump in to start. It's been very positive. First of all, we need to make sure that our investors are aware of it, aware of the template. So a lot of these are generalist investors. They're not necessarily utility-specific investors. So they need to know that this template is out there and that it's available. when we launched in using the 2016 data, so we launched just about a year ago now, we actually took the Eversource template and emailed it out to our investor list, which is, I don't know, 800 or 900 people or something like that. And we did the same thing this year when we were using 2017 data. So, and we had some favorable just responses back to us. So that was good to get out to our list. Now, the other list that's important is for a lot of the big firms, particularly the passive investors, where we are not routinely meeting with portfolio managers because the portfolio manager, frankly, is a computer, but they have live bodies that vote their proxies. We go through a process around this time every year where we reach out to our 30 largest holders and reach out to the governance folks as opposed to the portfolio management folks and see if there's any issues that we should be aware of on the governance side. We're also working with them to make sure that they have available to them this data, and they really like it because think about these folks. They're come proxy voting season, March, April, May, June. The bigger ones may be voting 2,000 or 3,000 proxies over the course of 4 months, and they need to have some of them need to have this data. So the fact that we've sort of put it all in one place. We've gotten very high marks for making it easier for them to find this data via the template. So I think that I have not heard any adverse comments. I think the main thing is just we have to syndicate it. We have to make sure that investors of all types know about it.
And if I could add to Jeff's comments, it's Bob. So similar comments on the investor side, so I won't repeat them. I would say that this is a good communications tool for other interested parties as well. And I would say most especially our employees, our regulators and customers have received very positive feedback from all of those groups, and especially the engagement by the employees. So it's useful on many levels.
Okay, great. Thank you both. And the next question that we have in is about the Natural Gas Sustainability Initiative. And what metrics are being considered for this next edition of the ESG template. So, Michael, did you want to take that one?
Sure. Yeah. And so I guess one thing to clarify to start out is as Devin described earlier, we have incorporated additional metrics into the template in coordination with AGA and their member companies, and so that's kind of the first evolution that we have. The more longer-term evolution will be NGSI, which is kind of bringing together the entire natural gas industry. But in terms of the metrics that we've added to the template, first I want to point out that there already is a lot of overlap in terms of what's relevant ESG information for both gas and electric companies. So looking at the qualitative section, the governance and strategy, a lot of that is going to be the same. A couple of additions that we have made in the qualitative section are related to the methane reduction strategy that a company is undertaking and kind of how a company is working to improve the culture of safety within the company. So those are a couple examples. In terms of the quantitative metrics, as Devin mentioned, it's essentially additional tabs that can be included within the Excel spreadsheet. So the primary focus on these metrics is methane emissions. So depending on the company's operations, these can be included for distribution operations, for transmission and storage operations, and even for gathering and boosting. And then in terms of normalizing these metrics, there is additional information that would be included related to miles of pipeline, number of customers. So really providing investors a way to kind of measure methane emission reductions.
Okay, great. Thanks, Michael. We have another question for Jeff or Bob. So the question is about sort of lessons learned from completing the EEI template. I think, Bob, you mentioned some of the lessons learned by, wanting to go digital versus print, but if you could just sort of explore a little bit more with the audience here, any lessons learned from completing the EEI template, that would be really valuable.
I'll start by saying that it seems ironic, but we were already collecting all this information, and I was concerned about creating more work for our people because obviously everyone's busy. So we were able to organize a group that's already doing this, so it streamlined the process that way, and then building off of our success at TCO, so not really reinventing the wheel. So I guess that's a learning, and having people self-identify that are interested in participating in this made it a great success as well. And going digital, completely digital, was a learning, although it seems very obvious. Just how important this information is, and not because it's legislated, but because of the demand and the pull from our customers, from our employees, and millennials, et cetera. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
This is Jeff. I'll just add that one of the things that I think the group maybe wrestles with a little bit at our meetings is the fixed income community, because for a fixed income investor, they're not looking at the umbrella information across the entire enterprise. They're going to invest primarily, at least with us, they're going to invest primarily in the operating companies, and we have 6 different operating companies. And for us, it may not be that big a deal because at this point, because of the sale of our New Hampshire generation, all 3 of the electric companies and the 2 gas companies are pretty similar to each other. But I think there are some of our members that one member I know very well. In one state, they're totally a wires company, just T&D, and the other state, they're fully integrated, where they operate a lot of coal plants. So they're going to get very different data depending on which subsidiary they're going to look at. So when we have, and we do have a pretty heavy representation of fixed income investors at our meetings, there is a push from some to do subsidiary by subsidiary data. So that's one topic, and I think it's important. I think it's a growing importance in the fixed income community. I'll just do a quick for instance. We've attended a Mitsubishi fixed income conference every year for like the last 5 or 6 years, and ESG never came up, absolutely never came up. 2 months ago, we were at the latest iteration of the conference, and we had 8 meetings over the course of 6 hours or so, all with fixed income folks, usually 2 or 3 investors per session, and ESG came up at 6 of the 8 sessions, and it had never come up at this conference previously. So I think there's just, we got to figure out, and again, not so much for us, but I think some of our members have to figure out whether they're going to break it down by subsidiary, operating company or not.
Thanks, Jeff. And Bob.
And one last point, this is Michael here, going back to the question on gas I failed to mention earlier. I should call out Pam Lacey for her work at AGA. She's the Chief Regulatory Counsel over there, and she's been deeply involved with us in the development of these metrics and working on ESG issues. So for anybody on the line that might have international membership with AGA or have more questions about gas issues, Pam Lacey would be the person to talk to over there.
Okay. And it looks like we have time for one more question, and this question is actually focused on EEI's international members, and if they were looking to engage on the EEI template, what would be the next steps for them to participate?
So this is Devin. We would welcome their participation in our ESG and sustainability committee or working group now. And then if there is member interest, we would welcome the opportunity to start an international ESG committee where we can really focus on expanding or developing our template to accommodate your needs. We recognize that many of the metrics are not applicable to some of our international electric companies, so we would need to convert or revise the template to adapt to your reporting requirements, and we would welcome the opportunity to work with you.
Wonderful. Well, this has been a really jam-packed hour of information, and we appreciate everyone who's been able to attend the webinar. Jeff and Bob, thank you so much for sharing your perspectives from Emera and Eversource. I think it was very valuable for the audience today. Eric, Devin, Michael, thank you from EEI for participating. And just some closing words that we understand that some of the slides may not have showed up during the presentations today, so all of the slide decks will be circulated after the webinar. Additionally, we will have the recording of the webinar circulated about within 1 week of today. And if you want to continue engaging on the subject matter, please reach out to us. You have the contact information for the EEI team here, and you also know the international email, which is internationaleei.org, if you want to receive the international monthly newsletter. So thank you all very much. For those of you based in the U.S., I hope you have a wonderful Thanksgiving this week, and we'll be in touch soon with the information for the webinar. So thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.